Hi Floss Tube, it's Susan Stanley here with Susan Stanley Stitch in Time, and today is a special edition Floss Tube which is all about quilting, specifically all about the Blackbird Designs Quilt Along that's being hosted by textilist and Olivia B. So Lori at Textilist asked me or challenged me to talk a little bit about the history of applique, because a lot of the Blackbird Designs projects involve applique, and then of course I have to take the challenge of finish some of my Blackbird Designs quilts. And I did want to take a minute to mention the recent passing of Barb, and how I feel this is so timely for us to honor her legacy by creating one of her patterns. She and Alma together were just such a, and still are and always will be, a prolific team. And whether you're a cross stitcher or a quilter or both, you have heard of them and you've been influenced by them. And I think it's we can honor her memory by creating one of her designs. So I think the timing of this is really good in light of that. So some beauty has left the earth, but we have her beautiful stitching behind, and I'm a firm believer that your stitching or the things that you do with your hands are your legacy. And I do also want to encourage you to write down as much as you can about your projects so that your people aren't left guessing. Anyway, all right, I won't go on and on. What a week. I do also want to give a disclaimer. I am not a historian. I've been studying and reading and attending lectures for 40 years on quilts and textiles. I don't know it all. I'm still learning, but I would love to share with you what I know, and I would also love to learn. So just wanted to get that disclaimer. Carol at Saltbox Stitcher has been really involved in this Blackbird Designs Quilt Along project as well. Her video is unbelievable. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But today I want to show you a little bit about the history of applique, and then as I know it, and then show you the two Blackbird Designs projects I'm hoping to challenge myself to finish during this Blackbird Designs Quilt Along. All right, so the word applique is actually derived from a French word, and I don't speak French, so I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, but it's something along the lines of appliquer. It's spelled very similar to the way we pronounce it in English. And it means to put on, and where one piece of fabric is sewn on another, and specifically for a decorative effect. Now, applique, as we know it, wasn't always around, but the process of applying fabric on top of fabric has been around probably since the beginning of fabric, because there was a need for mending. And so mending and a necessary function ended up becoming an art form and a way of showing beauty and expressing yourself. And that's so true with so much in needle arts, where it was a function of necessity that became a work of art. It's likely that it began in this way, and it's been around for centuries, and it's really been around in every culture. It ranges from India to Africa, to the British coverlets and American quilts. It goes down into South America, other forms, and I'll show you a little bit of it. I don't have a lot of knowledge and expertise in in other countries, but I do really appreciate the handwork that's involved in their creations. So early textiles were woven and knitted from typically cotton, wool, silk, and linen. And those are all things that we love to work with today. And then as animals became domesticated and it was easier to get the product, of course, you know, from a sheep or whatever, to make these materials, and as things became a little more standardized in the fabrication or the creation of fabric, decorating became more of the focus. So we moved from function to form. And I have to believe that, you know, early on, thousands of years ago, when someone was mending a hole, their creativity came out, and there were some fun things happening there, but I don't have proof of that. So I want to show you some examples of lots of other cultures' applique, and then we'll go more into the American quilts, because I think those were very influential in Barb and Alma's designs, and then we'll go into Blackbird. So India has a lot of, the country of India is really one of the bedrocks of fabric, and some early applique that came and is still being used today. There are several styles, and I can't do any description or information on them justice, other than to show you a picture. So this is a picture of some Indian applique from Bahari. I believe it's the Bahari style, and there are a couple different styles, but you can see that these are pieces of cloth that have been affixed or appliqued or put on a background fabric. And this one in the middle, notice, because it's gonna, an image similar to that's gonna pop up later. You might even recognize it if you're a quilter, something along those lines. All right, and then this is a gorgeous bed quilt adapted from a floor spread. I'm going to show you a bunch of books, and I'm going to hold the cover up so you can get the information. I may not type all of it in on the bottom, but this is 4 Centuries of Quilts, the Colonial Williamsburg collection. If you're interested in this book, it's a beautiful book. But here's a picture of an Indian floor spread that became a quilt, and it's all appliqued. And this bed quilt was made around 1730, 1750. So think about samplers, band samplers, things that you know from that time period. Kind of interesting. Another area where applique has gone on and is continuing to go on is from Africa. And there is a style of applique from that region called Benin Applique. And of course there's that pesky peacock I talked about before, but just beautiful, vibrant colors. A lot of the applique from this region is story in nature, meaning that the appliqued objects tell a story and are a way of expressing personal experiences. Another region, another area where you see applique is in Panama. And the applique done in Panama is called mola. And I actually own some, I just couldn't find it. This is all reverse applique. And so there are several layers of fabric, all these different colors layered on top of each other. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a little bit. But the pieces are cut away and then the edges turned under to reveal the color underneath. Very, very ornate, very complicated. This is really, really skilled work just beautiful. And then this is the same mola technique, but from the Hmong tribe. They are nomadic people group. Just beautiful. That's also the reverse applique. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the types of applique later on. So we see this, and then we see things like one of the earliest coverlets from Britain is the 1718 coverlet, and this is actually a pattern. Someone has, Susan Briscoe has taken the original coverlet and drafted it up, but I'll just show you a little bit. That block is similar to the one we saw in India and is similar to ones we'll see later on. It's actually a snowflake block. So it's for a piece of paper folded in four, and then, okay, and that is still a type of applique used today. And then we get into all the more well-known, at least in our time period, as far as ancient. Okay, I had to take a break. I had somebody at my door. So one thing I didn't mention was that in a tradition in Africa with, because I know I had talked about some traditions last time in my last video, and I found this one, and I found it, I don't know if it's still in practice, but the Fawn people group of Benin have a tradition where friends and loved ones bring cloth to a funeral and applique an image onto the cloth to represent the deceased person's life and achievements. So there's just so much meaning in cloth, and it really expands all over the world. Cloth has also been found in Egyptian tombs of the pharaohs. And if you want a really interesting visual experience, I'm going to link a YouTube link below to a place called the Street of the Tentmakers in Cairo, Egypt. And this is an area where the tents have been created for centuries, and they are not just simple tents. They are ornately decorated with applique and imagery that is just phenomenal. From what I can tell, it seems to be mostly a male-driven job in Cairo to be a tent, to make these gorgeous tents. But there is a YouTube video you can watch and actually experience it. And it's actually a street that you could go visit as a tourist, but if you're not able to get there. So it's definitely worth watching. Okay, so that's just a really, really simple, brief, kind of not very in-depth overview of applique. Just to give you an idea that, you know, it's not just what we're doing today. This has been going on for centuries. And I think that, to me, that's exciting because, of course, I'm all about connections, connecting with the past and with other people. So there are 3 types of applique according to Barbara Brackman. And Barbara Brackman is kind of a quilt textile guru. If you haven't heard of her, she's been around for my whole quilting life and has created fabrics through Moda, fabrics and patterns, and done tons of research. Her blogs are just full of information. She's a wealth of knowledge. So the 3 types of applique I'm going to talk to you about today are conventional applique, which is probably what most of us will be doing if we're doing this Blackbird Designs Quilt Along. Reverse applique, which does pop up, and one of my projects has some of it, and then cut out chintz applique. And so the first method I want to talk to you about, or the first process I want to talk to you about, is reverse applique. And reverse applique involves your background fabric and then another fabric of the same size placed on top and basted onto the background fabric, and then basted a design. And instead of applying the design in the shape that it was already, you're going to actually cut away from the top layer to reveal the background fabric and fold the edges under. And I'm going to show you in a minute when I show you one of my projects. I'm going to show that to you so you get a little bit better idea. There are quilts like the Hawaiian quilts that are purely reverse applique. There are times in applique where you have to use it. It's scary when you're first starting out, but it actually, I find, turns under so much easier. And I'm not sure why. I think it's because of the bias you have. Anyway, so that is reverse applique, where you're cutting away the top to reveal the background underneath and stitching it. It's also called inlaid applique. So that's another word for it. A type of applique that I showed you last time when I was showing you the quilt with the peacocks on it is, as Barbara Brackman calls it, cut out chintz applique. And she calls it cut out chintz applique, but it's also known as broderie perse, which is a French term for Persian embroidery, or cretonne applique. And what that involves is taking a gorgeous piece of fabric with an image on it, like a rose bouquet, or just a single rose, or a peacock, or a bird, cutting that image out of the fabric and then applying that or appliquing that on to your background fabric with either a small little whip stitch, a small little blanket stitch, or actually turning it under. There are a lot of designers out today who are reproducing quilts with this cutout chintz applique. And the reason Barbara uses the word cutout chintz is because it's a little more descriptive of the process rather than broderie perse. But all those terms are pretty interchangeable. If you hear broderie perse, it's talking about that same process. It was really popular in the 18th and 19th centuries. And it actually traces back to the 17th century, and that's when chintz fabric was being produced and brought to Europe from India. India was already doing a lot of their own applique with their gorgeous chintz fabric, but then Europeans took on their own take on it. And it was really replaced by conventional applique after the Civil War in this country, in America. During the Civil War, applique kind of came to a halt, and you can imagine why. Supplies were in short demand, and there just wasn't time. The cutout chintz applique is often combined with embroidery, conventional applique, and reverse applique, and sometimes piecing. So if you see an antique quilt, and it has all of those on it, if you can, if you are trying to date a quilt, if you would know from seeing all those items on the quilt that it's probably pre-1865. So I will show you some examples here in a minute. And then the last method that I'm going to talk about is the conventional applique. Now, these are types of applique. There are a ton of techniques, and Lori and Olivia, so Lori from Textilist and Olivia from Olivia B, and I will put their hashtag or their links below, because if you're interested in following along with this, you'll definitely want to watch both of their videos, and you'll want to watch Carol Saltbach Stitcher, because she shows you her collection of Blackbird Designs books. Olivia does a nice walkthrough. Lori does a walkthrough of her Blackbird Designs books, and now Lori, I believe, if I understand this correctly, is going to start showing techniques of how to applique, different ways to do this conventional applique, which will be really great for people learning. And you know, if you've never done applique before, what a gift to the stitching community. So conventional applique is where you lay a piece of fabric on. Now it's either a snowflaked image like I showed you before, or it's an actual image of a person, or if it's a part of a flower to complete the whole flower. Any of that is considered conventional applique. In 18th century quilts, it wasn't the dominant feature of the quilt. It was maybe shown on the borders, a little swag that was appliqued on, or a bow, maybe a few flowers on the border. By 1840, conventional applique was all over the quilt. I mean, the whole quilt was done with conventional applique. And it started to appear in block format, where each block had its own snowflaked image or ornately appliqued scene or pot of flowers or whatever, typically followed by a signature, because a lot of these quilts were given as somebody was moving away. Everyone would make a block, put the blocks together, and pass them on to the friend who was leaving. Early album quilts used conventional applique and the cutout chintz, but by 1840 it was pretty much pure conventional applique. And then, like I said before, during the Civil War, it kind of abruptly stopped and didn't really start up again too much until about the 1920s. So, and now it's everywhere. There are and like I said, the techniques are endless. So let's look at a few examples in some of my books, and then I'll show you my projects. Okay, this is a great book. I don't know, I can't remember if I showed it to you before, Hidden Treasures. And please don't feel obligated to buy all these books. I'm just showing them to you if you're motivated to go for it, but I don't want anybody to break their budget. So this is one of those quilts that I was talking about, where it's got the conventional applique. It's got these beautiful snowflaked images. This one reminds me a lot of that Indian motif that I showed you earlier, their block. And then it has some applique floral scenes. This was the height of the red and green era in quilting and American quilts, so you see a lot of these quilts are done in red and green. Look at that. From what I can tell, these are all applique, conventional applique laid on top of the background fabric. I don't think any of these are reverse applique. That quilt is Sophia Piles, and it was made in 1848. These books, one thing I love about these books is the inspiration that you can gain from them. I mean, you know me, and I love to reproduce old quilts, and I could just spend hours. So here's another one, Duncan's Delight Album Quilt, 1855. Just a little bit of pink thrown in, but the same. And this one is mostly just applique, conventional applique. And then there's that signature on the back. So she's left her mark, letting us know what's going on. Beautiful border. I can't talk about applique without talking about the Harriet Powers quilt. Harriet Powers was an African-American farm woman from Clark County, Georgia. She showed her quilt at the Athens Cotton Fair in 1886. And this was such a step away from those red and green quilts I was showing you. It got tons of attention. It's fabulous. It's her Bible quilt, and it tells a story. And so, I'm not sure if I mentioned earlier, but a lot of the traditional African applique from the continent of Africa involves a story. It's not just images for pleasing effect, it's actually telling you a story. And so she was kind of carrying that through here in her quilt. This quilt is a Smithsonian Treasure. It's out of the Smithsonian Treasure American Quilts, Treasury of American Quilts. And if you're interested in reading more about Harriet Powers, I recommend it. She was a fascinating woman, quite a story. But the quilts in here are all really top-notch. Here's a classic Baltimore Applique style quilt. So we would call this a style quilt because this was not made in Baltimore. And so you can see it's getting more and more intricate, more and more ornate. And again, that red and green. Okay. Another kind of applique icon is a woman named Susan McCord. It's hard to talk about applique without mentioning her. Her quilts were, she was a farm wife, and she lived from 1829 to 1909. And this is one of her quilts. These are quilts from the Henry Ford Museum. And what's really unique about her quilts is this leaf is not one fabric. This leaf is probably 10 different fabrics pieced together in strips. And all those leaves and vines are appliqued on. This is her vine quilt. There's a So without giving you too much, that's kind of what you're doing. And then you take that strip set and cut your leaf out on top. Just idea, you know, maybe you want to spice up one of your own projects with some of Susan McCord's technique. There are quilts from, of course, like I said, all over the place. And this quilt is, I can't go without mentioning it. This quilt is from a Welsh tailor, and it's called the Tailor's Quilt, and it's made using wool, and a lot of people are doing the wool along, but I suspect this is remnants of the wool that was used. And this was made in 1852. So we're kind of in that same, and this was in Wales. This is a beautiful book. If you like Welsh, you know, I love Welsh samplers. I love Scottish samplers. I am always looking for connections between the samplers and the quilts and the clothing and how they were influenced, you know. All right, this next applique quilt, and I'm just showing you some interesting applique quilts just for inspiration and just to add to a little bit of your knowledge of applique in the past. So this is Glorious American Quilts by Elizabeth Warren and Sharon Eisenstadt. I'm sorry, my glasses aren't working so great. I think my eyes must be getting worse. But this one is really noteworthy. This one's from Pennsylvania. It's a Sarah Ann Gargis Applique Quilt, 1834. And look at those colors. This is a little more of a story. There's definitely a scene going on. Looks like a lot of corn and crops here at the bottom, so a lot of farm life being represented in her quilt. And once you learn to applique and love applique, you know, it's easy to think about creating your story, your own story with quilts. We're kind of jumping around here, but this is an earlier applique, and it's an applique quilt from 1810, and it's just randomly placed objects with this beautiful chintz in the middle and these gorgeous leaves. It's pretty haphazard, but you do see some quilts during that time frame along those lines. So kind of interesting. This one is Quilt Treasures of Great Britain. If you need more information on any of these books, please contact me or leave a comment below, and I'll be sure to add it to you if what I'm showing you is not enough. And then the final one that I want to show you is from 1860, probably 1860, 1875. It's an album quilt, probably from New York. It includes patchwork and applique. Of course, it's got my Civil War bride image there, and there's that red. So they've been combining, quilt makers, needleworkers have been combining applique and piecework and you name it since the beginning. All right. So that's a brief, very, very brief little peek at those who came before us, those whose shoulders we stand on, those people who did not have half the tools we have, not even close. They probably had white thread, that's it, one spool, maybe a pack of needles, maybe a few needles. They had old clothes. If they were wealthy, they had access to fabric in stores, but they were only they were limited to whatever that store had. Usually you didn't see yards and yards and yards of the same fabric in a folk quilt. It would be in a quilt that a wealthier person owned or created. So maybe they had a pair of scissors. They probably had a template that was either cut from tin, or if they were lucky enough to have paper or any kind of cardboard, which cardboard wasn't even around, any kind of substance that they could create a template out of. Yeah, and then I look at my sewing room. So, okay, so I have a lot of Blackbird Designs books. I've given a ton away. Every time I move, I purge. So I've gotten rid of a ton, and I'm not going to go through all these books because Carol and Lori and Olivia have done a fantastic job of that on their own. So, but I do want to show you my two favorite, and it's hard to narrow it down to two, but my two all-time favorite, if you can only get two, When the Cold Wind Blows. Hands down, eye candy. There are so many quilts in here. There are quilts I'm working on, and there are more that I want to make. So personally, this is one of my favorites. And then Birds of a Feather. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous books. The quilts in those two books are just phenomenal. It's hard not to mention them all, but I'll leave that to the other floss tubers who have done a fabulous job of that. One of the quilts that I'm challenged to finish is the Raven, and I have already passed the book on because the blocks are done for the most part. I just have to put it together, but I do have a picture of it, and this book is still available. This is not that old. I think it's just a few years old. I still need to do this outside border and these do the sashing and put it all together. This I got when I moved to Washington. The local shop, I said, I'm not buying anything. I'm not buying any more quilt projects. And I walked in there and this was hanging on the wall and it was a kit. And they were doing it as a block of the month that you met together and stitched. And I thought, I want to meet people. So I bought it, of course, and I'm not done. So this one, I'll show you all the blocks. This might be a long video. I keep my blocks in this, it's a mailing tube and a piece of flannel and fabric, and then you just lay the blocks on here and roll them up, and then you can tie it, and it keeps them kind of flat. They're not perfect, but so I'll show you these that I have so far. This is a great project for anyone because the pieces are really big. You can try needle turn with this block because they are so huge. Now I pretty much stuck with the colors, the fabrics that the kit provided, but I switched some out. And each block, I think Olivia talked about the name of each block. It's just fun. It's all centered around Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven. And it's soft fall colors. It's not harsh oranges. Why I don't have this done? I'm trying to be better. And then see, I do crazy things like I leave one leaf and then, I don't know what. I got distracted by something else, I guess. This won't take too long, but I really am trying to be, okay, now we're getting more into, okay, so I'm gonna leave it to the other ladies to show you how to do these techniques, but this is kind of an idea of what needle turn looks like. So before you stitch your piece down, you trace the shape in Soline or Bohemian chalk or something, whatever you like, and I'm sure Lori's going to talk about all that. And then as you're stitching, you're turning this edge under, right up to the chalk. So I've got that, a few pieces. And I changed the house. Instead of a purple house, I made it kind of a grayish black house. I think I added some pink in there too. Pieces are falling off. Okay. Now we get into a few more. Okay, so these are all prepped. So you can see the line. Sometimes, you know, after you've done it for any of these techniques that Lori's going to talk to you about. Oh, there's a line. A few things about applique. I absolutely love applique, but just know there is no technique that's fast. There just isn't. It's a time-consuming activity, just like stitching a sampler. And I think what Lori's doing is fabulous because I think trying as many techniques as you can is giving you a whole lot of options for the future of the projects that you work on. There are some projects that you might do all in one technique. There are some techniques you might use once and never use again. There are some projects you might do and use a multiple variety. Okay, and then the next quilt I want to finish is the Trick or Treat basket quilt. It's in When the Cold Wind Blows, and I had started it years ago and kitted it up and had it kind of as my travel project, and show you some of the blocks that I finished. They're just really sweet little baskets. This little window here is reverse applique. So I have a bunch finished. I have a bag full of finished. I have a bag full of in the process, and I have a little kit. I want to show you a little bit about how so I have all my backgrounds cut. And those are in this bag, and they're all kitted, ready to go. I have my triangle pieces prepped. So the triangle block in the corner of this quilt. Sorry. Let's see here. This quilt is such eye candy. The location where the pictures were taken is just stunning. So you can see it has this little fleur-de-lis triangle all the way around. And so I've got those prepped. I don't know if that was a very good showing. And then I kind of kitted up from my collection of fabric. So I don't typically use kits because I have a lot of fabric. And as you applique and quilt, it doesn't take many quilts to start collecting a lot of gorgeous leftover pieces. So I'm kind of going with blues, browns, and I have these all ready so that I can prep my baskets, reds and pinks. And I like to use larger scale prints and small scale prints. I think it adds a lot of interest to the quilt, and anyway, it just makes me really happy to do it that way. I have pieces prepped for pretty much every technique out there. So I have freezer paper pieces, and if you don't know what this technique is, when you watch Textilist, she's going to explain all of it. I have positioning pieces. So when you have your block and you need to figure out where to put the handle and the basket, you lay this over the top, and then you can lift this up like a little window, kind of scoot these around. And okay, I'm having technical difficulties, but you can scoot them around and position them and pin them and then start appliquing. So let me get the light on here, sorry. All right, this won't be my best professional effort, but I want to get through it. So I have plastic template pieces cut for the basket and the handle. And so I'm all ready to use whatever technique I want to do for that day. As you learn about the techniques from Lori, Textilist, you'll get to pick your favorite technique too and move on from there. So mostly I just wanted to encourage you that even this small project is doable, and don't be afraid of small pieces because they turn under and move, the fabric moves just as easily and nicely as the big pieces. I have a giveaway because as I was going through all of this and really kind of solidifying my kit, I decided there were some colors that I wasn't going to use and some finished baskets that I'm not going to use. So I have some black and brown and a green. I have one that's prepped edges, pinned on, but the window isn't done. So if you want to try to win this giveaway, I have this where it's the applique pressed on, ready to go in the background. So I have these background pieces and these fabrics that I want to give away to anyone who's participating in this and who thinks they want to try different techniques. I also have in the giveaway several of the freezer paper shapes cut out. And if this doesn't make sense to you because you haven't learned from Lori yet, don't worry, it will. And some baskets partially prepped. Hey, one last thing. If you would like to win the Trick or Treat Basket Starter Pack with my leftover pieces that I'm not going to use, put Trick or Treat below in the comments. Don't mention that it's for a prize. You have to be 18 years or older, and you have to be also willing to pay for the shipping. The way that'll work is once you win, I will contact you. I'll send you a PayPal invoice for the shipping, and it's yours. All right. Take care, and I'll have a regular video for Floss Tube up next week. Bye. Happy stitching.